everybody. This is another episode of the Exodus Project. I'm joined again with my good friend, Houston, Texas, Rabbi Stuart Federer.
Hi.
Today is part one of, we are going to talk about Isaiah 53 a little bit and actually, kind of answer an angle that someone had brought up regarding Isaiah 53 in the early church. But before we get started, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notifications, give the Rabbi and I a big thumbs up, and be sure to check out the description. All the books linked, including his, Judaism, Christianity, A Contrast, English and Spanish. So go down there and get yourself a copy. So, okay, I'm going to share my screen, and we can get right into...
It's so nice of you to share.
Hey, I'm a nice guy. What can I say? Get right into Acts 8, which is the citation he wanted us to address. So
yeah, but there's so much more than this to address. But so okay, so I'll read it.
I can read it if you want to. You're going to be doing a lot of talking, so I can read it if you like.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Acts 8 and 26. Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, "Rise and go toward the south to the road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. This is a desert place." And he rose and went, and there was an Ethiopian, a eunuch, a court official of Candace, queen of the Ethiopians, who was in charge of all her treasure. He had come to Jerusalem to worship and was returning, seated in his chariot, and was reading the prophet Isaiah. And the Spirit said to Philip, "Go over and join this chariot." So Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, "Do you understand what you are reading?" And he said, "How can I unless someone guides me?" And he invited Philip to come and sit with him. Now the passage of the scripture that he was reading was this: "Like a sheep, he was led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opens not his mouth. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth." And the eunuch said to Philip, "About whom, I ask you, does the prophet say this? About himself or about someone else?" Then Philip opened his mouth, and beginning with the scripture, he told him the good news about Jesus. And as they were going along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What prevents me from being baptized?" And he commanded the chariot to stop, and they both went down into the water, Philip and the eunuch, and he baptized him. And when they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord carried Philip away, and the eunuch saw him no more, and went on his way rejoicing. But Philip found himself at Azotus as he passed through and preached the gospel of all the towns until he came to Caesarea. So the whole rub, his whole point was that it just goes to show that in the early church, they understood Isaiah 53 to be about Jesus and a suffering Messiah. But as you and I pointed out prior to recording, and I don't want to forget it, Peter rebukes Jesus for saying he's going to suffer.
Right. And but can we go back to it before we?
Yeah, of course. Is there any specific verse you want on there?
Go to the beginning.
Go to the beginning? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Notice something, and it's very important to understand. Okay. If he wants to believe that this is an accurate portrayal of the early church, he can believe whatever he wants to.
Right.
Okay. And the book of Acts, okay, is part of the earliest of the writings of the church. But if he wants to say it's an early Christian belief, go right ahead. But it's still after the crucifixion of Jesus,
and it's still a Christian belief.
And it's a Christian belief that develops after the cross.
Right.
The question becomes exactly. The question becomes: did they have this belief before the cross?
Exactly.
Jesus is supposed to bring all the things that the real Messiah will do when the real Messiah comes. Instead, he's up on the cross dying.
Yep.
And you either say, "Oops, I was wrong to believe that he was the Messiah," or you redefine the term Messiah so you don't have to give up your faith, and then say that Jesus fulfilled that new definition.
Exactly. Yep.
And my urging would be to take the book When Prophecy Fails, and read through it. It's a sociological study of religions and how they react when they believe they have a prophecy from God, and how they respond when it does not happen.
Right.
Okay. And then, by the way, it's a perfect example of Christianity. even though it goes out of its way to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. And then you look at the date of publication, right in the middle of the McCarthy era.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay, so look at verse 30.
Okay.
Philip ran to him and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet and asked, do you understand what you are reading? And he said, how can I unless someone guides me? This is how Christians get Jews to become Christian.
Mm-hmm.
When they teach, when he says, how can I understand the text unless someone guides me? And then he's going to be guided not by someone who is Jewish, but by a Christian.
Right.
So the Christian is now going to teach according to the Christian understanding, shall we say, of the Hebrew scriptures. So slowly, or in this case quickly, he begins to look at the Hebrew scriptures not from the Hebrew mentality, not from Judaism's viewpoint, but rather from Christianity's viewpoint.
Right. And isn't it just so like convenient that that's the chapter he's reading?
Oh, very much so, which brings me to a question. Okay, we will talk about, okay, verse 32, we will talk about, like a sheep he is led to the slaughter, and like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opens not his mouth. But you're going to have to show me when we get to it where we find the verse in Isaiah 53, in his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life was taken away from the earth. You're going to have to show me that and say, oh yeah, Rabbi, this is where it was it was mentioned that he's quoting in Acts 8. Because I don't remember, in his humiliation, justice was denied him. Who can describe his generation? For his life is taken away from the earth. Where's that translation?
Right.
But I don't remember it offhand. But if you find it, show it to me. Point it out to me and say, Rabbi, that's what he's talking about. Okay, because what you're going to find is what you're going to find is a different translation. In his humiliation, justice was denied him. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
But even let's concede what this translation says. If God's entire plan was to send Jesus to die, then how in the world was justice denied him? If that was his entire point of even being there, does that mean God's plan isn't just?
Wait, I'm sorry. Say it again.
I said, let's even just go with the translation on the screen that Acts is saying, right?
Yes.
It's in his humiliation, justice was denied him. They're saying that talks about Jesus being wrongfully accused, right?
I guess.
But if this was God's plan from the beginning, is God unjust? Is
right.
God not a just judge?
Absolutely.
Send his only son to die?
Right.
It's a self-defeating argument. You know what I mean? It's, and we're going to get into how it's a self-defeating argument as we get into your compilation of the presentation. But that's just something like it's you're basically calling God unjust if he's the one who sent it. If it was his divine plan from before the world was created,
to do this, right?
You know.
And by the way, that leads us right into your quotation, okay, where the disciples of Jesus, and again, remember, this is before the crucifixion,
right?
They have no idea what Jesus is talking about, if he even said these words, because you know all of this is later.
Yeah. Oh yeah. What does Peter say? Be it far from you, my Lord, I think.
And this is only a few verses after Jesus called Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. Okay. And then a few verses later, Peter says, you know, far be it from you. This should never happen. God forbid, whatever he says. And what's Jesus' response? You're Satan. Get behind me, Satan. You're Satan. Okay. Which he's saying about the man that he just called the church, the rock upon which God is going to build his church, has now all of a sudden become Satan. Because like all the other Jews, this was not expected. This is how they turned the failure of Jesus being the Messiah, because he died instead of doing what the real Messiah is supposed to do, into what he had to do.
Yeah.
It's not that Jesus died on the cross, so we're wrong. It's that Jesus had to die on the cross. We just had the wrong idea of what the Messiah is really meant to do.
Right.
So, all right. Let's move on.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we'll get back to the full text, but I need to talk about something else.
Sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wait a minute. Let's see. I need. Okay. All right. Christians believe that Isaiah 53 is the perfect description of the life and death of Jesus. And because it's so perfect a description, they feel that Jesus must have been the Messiah because he seems to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah 53.
Hmm.
Christians believe that this is such an incredibly perfect description of Jesus that the Jews are forbidden to read it. I have never heard anything in my life. You go on the YouTube, you can find videos of the forbidden chapter.
Right. Right.
Okay. Because we rabbis, we know the real truth of Christianity, but we want to hide it from our people because we'd rather hide it from our people than admit anything.
Yeah. That's
You know,
some protocols of the elders of Zion type garbage.
boy, you're not kidding, Steve. It's like these people. Oh, I love the Jews. I love Israel. I love the Jews. If they really knew the Jews in order to be able to love them, they would know that if I, as a rabbi, told my congregation or anybody who's Jewish, you're forbidden to read this chapter, what do you think the first thing they would do would be?
Read it.
They're going to go read it.
Yeah.
They don't want to know. They think that because Christian ministers seem to have a lot of control over their flock, kicking them out of the church if they don't toe the party line and all that stuff, right, that there must be the same for the rabbis. That's not what we are.
Right.
It's not how Judaism works.
They're to teach. Yep.
We're here. Well, we're here to teach. We're actually here to adjudicate Jewish law.
Okay.
And in the process of doing that, we teach. But the word rabbi never meant teacher.
Right. Right.
Okay. I may revere you. That doesn't make you a reverend. I may teach, but being a teacher doesn't make me a rabbi.
Right.
Okay. So these Christians, it's forbidden to read it.
Unrelated, but before you continue on,
go ahead.
I was speaking with my grandmother the other day, and she's been asking me more questions about the Bible and stuff recently, Baruch Hashem. And I said, you know what? Like, I hear some of these people talk about, this type thing, right? The forbidden chapter type stuff, and the Jews run the world, all that kind of. And I'm like, over the last year, I've met so many beautiful people, so many Jewish people, and I must say their integrity makes mine look pathetic. But more integrity than most people I've ever even met in my life. And she's just sat there and couldn't fathom what I was saying, But it's just like, don't judge this is bigotry. Don't judge a people before you have even met any of them.
Steve, I am the first, and I'm cleaning up my words. I am the first to say that there are some Jews who are creeps. Okay, we are not perfect. We are people. We're human beings.
Right, of course.
Okay. Of course. But Judaism has a very positive view. We don't give up on the battle between doing good and doing evil, between the inclination to do good and the inclination to do bad. Right. And we've all got these inclinations. Okay. But I'm glad that you've had very good experiences. You can just as easily have bad experiences with
I have, and that's fine.
I'm sure.
But just by and large,
right,
my experience has been good, even with the bad, and even with the bad, I kind of understand why,
Right. All right.
Yeah.
So, by the way, who made the Bible? Who decided what should be in the Bible? Who maintained the Bible? Once it was decided this is the Bible, who kept it and maintained its sanctity? The Jews. If Christianity comes along and there was a chapter that the Jews gotta not have anybody read,
why not just take it out?
Then take it out. Then cut it out. So that whole thing is just, it's actually hilarious that people actually would believe there would be a chapter that Jews are forbidden to read. Although there are passages I believe the Christians must be forbidden to read because they don't even know it's there. That's another issue, another video. Okay.
That's funny.
All right. A thing we're told that to prove that it's forbidden is that the Jews read from the prophets every week in their religious services, but the 53rd chapter of Isaiah was intentionally left out because it's so obviously a description of Jesus. Okay, no part of the Jewish Bible was ever censored by the Jewish people. At no time were Jews forbidden to read any part of the Bible. And as we just said, had the Jews wanted to censor any part, they'd have left it out.
Right.
Okay, because it was the Jews of the post-Second Temple period that determined what would and would not be in what we call the Bible. And by the way, the Jews of Greece, okay, 2,300 years ago, give or take, were calling these collections of books ta Biblia, the Bible, which comes from the root the books. So
Right.
we were calling our Hebrew scriptures the Bible. The Jews of Greece were calling it ta Biblia, the Bible, long before Jesus was dead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay. By the way, we should also kind of remind everybody to go take a look at the history of Christianity, where they really didn't allow their flock to read the Bible on their own.
Oh, for sure. Not really until the Reformation. Yeah.
And the translators of the Bible were killed by the church.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the history of what's his name? Tinsdale,
Yeah.
whatever. Okay, look at some of the history of the printers of the Bible.
Right.
Okay, the truth of the matter is, when we read on Shabbat from the Bible, okay, we also read something from the collection of prophets.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the haftarah. Now, there's a period in Jewish history. Most people believe it was under the Syrians,
the Seleucids.
before the Maccabees rebelled. Hanukkah story. So
Mm-hmm.
before Hanukkah happened, and Antiochus, or Antiochus, however you want to pronounce that, forbade the Jews to read from the Torah on pain of death. So it comes time for the Torah to be read, the 5 books of Moses to be read in the service, but you can't read from the Torah because there might be a Syrian soldier pretending to be Jewish, and if you read from the Torah, he just locks the door and kills every man, woman, and child in the room.
Right.
So they come to the Torah reading, but you can't read from the Torah. So instead, they chose passages from the prophets that would hint at what should have been read that Saturday from the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
When the Jews rebelled and won their rebellion against Syria, the Maccabees won, they started reading the Torah again, of course, but they also kept reading from the passage from the prophets because it enhanced the meaning of the Torah portion.
Right. Right.
There's nothing in the Torah that reflects the real meaning of Isaiah 53 at any time of the year. So there's no parallel in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, or Deuteronomy to Isaiah 53. So why would it be chosen? Also remember, these choices for what would be read in the haftarah was, and listen carefully, well after the Babylonian exile, but before Jesus was born.
Right.
So the choice for those passages had nothing to do with Jesus or anything in Christianity.
Right.
And if you want a quick example, okay, let's say it's the Sabbath where we read from Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, which obviously is the creation story.
Mm-hmm.
What do we read as the section of the prophets to reflect the creation story? It comes from Isaiah 42, 5 through 12, which begins, thus says God the Eternal, who created the heavens and who stretched them out. So you come into services, time to read the Torah, cannot read from the Torah, and instead they're reading from Isaiah 42, and you hear them read, thus says God the Eternal, who created the heavens and stretched them out. Stretch them out. Oh, I know, this must be where we read about creation.
Right.
Okay. So Isaiah 53 parallels nothing in the Torah. So of course it wasn't chosen to be read in place of anything in the Torah in years, decades, whatever, preceding the birth, the death of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Okay. Christians are told that the Jews are forbidden to read Isaiah 53, or that the Jews don't read Isaiah 53 when we read from the prophetic section, the Haftarah on Shabbat, because they can't understand how the Jews can read Isaiah 53 and not immediately say, oh, this is Jesus fulfilling that passage, like your friend was mentioning Acts 8. But by the way, there are a lot of reasons why the Jews do not view the prophecy of Isaiah 53 being fulfilled in Jesus. Okay, now, okay, we're going to read the translation that, frankly, most people read. Okay. All right. Notice that we are not beginning with Isaiah 53 verse 1. We are beginning with Isaiah 52 verse 13. Notice how the first line is, "Behold my servant."
Yep.
This whole passage is called the suffering servant passage. It's a servant of God who suffers because the servant is a servant of God. Okay? There's a whole history of how the Christians really divided up the verses and chapters and everything. But when people refer to Isaiah 53, they really do mean to include Isaiah 52, 13, 14, and 15.
Right.
Okay. All right. Having said that, behold my servant, and before we read, I want to make sure you understand, all the listeners, readers, watchers of this video understand, this is a mistranslation. This is not what the Hebrew actually says, but it's the most often used translation.
Right.
Okay? All right. Behold, my servant shall prosper. He shall be exalted and lifted up, and shall be very high. As many were astonished at thee, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the sons of men. So shall he startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them they shall see, and that which they have not heard they shall understand. Now we begin with Isaiah 53. Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no former comeliness that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that made us whole, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. That's what Acts 28 was quoting. Then it goes on to say, verse 8, by oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people? And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When he makes himself an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the fruit of the travail of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. Anybody with ears who knows the story of Jesus, that is going to sound like Jesus. Okay? And there's a reason for that. Okay? There's a reason for that. Okay? But before we go on to that, I want to point out a few of the really blatant mistranslations. Okay? So I want you to go back to the, okay, thank you. All right. And first we're going to take a look at verse 5. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Notice I include the Hebrew here, and I want you to see something. Okay. Anybody who knows the least about Hebrew A third grader learning Hebrew will know more and will understand why this is a bad translation. Okay. Hebrew uses prefixes. So you'll have a letter attached to a word that will be a preposition, like for.
Right.
Okay. All right. But he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. Isn't the prefix here? It's a mem.
Yep.
Can you point out the mem? It's underlined in both instances.
Yep.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second.
That's fine. Blank it out and just blanket it. Stop the purple and put up, there we go. And then do it. Yeah. Okay. It's a mem. Mem is the prefix meaning from. Okay. If the word was for, it would be a lamed, l. It's not l for, it's m, from. He was wounded from our transgressions. He was bruised from our sin, our iniquities.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to be wounded from it?
Because
of it.
Yep.
Jesus, okay, whoever this is talking about, it's not saying he died for our sin. It's saying he died because of our sin. Steve, if I murder you, if I persecute you, if I torture you, if I burn your homes down and your synagogues down and burn your books, I'm the one who sinned, who suffered because I sinned. You did.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So this is saying that this servant is suffering at whose hands?
The nation.
And for that, you have to ask the question, who's doing the speaking here? We'll get to that. Okay, we'll get to that. So verse 5 sets this whole thing up incorrectly. Mm-hmm. It should be a way of saying the nations of the earth, the leadership, the kings, the royalty of the nations of the earth realized all along we were wrong, the Jews were right. That means that what they did to the Jews was sin, and the Jews died as a result of, the Jews died because of, the Jews died from the sins of the non-Jewish nations. Okay.
Right. If the prefix was for, that would be a lamed, right?
That's what I'm saying. The lamed, the l means for, the mem means m means from.
Right.
So even a child learning Hebrew knows that l means for, and the m means from. So, but he was wounded from our transgressions, mi pasha'enu. He was bruised from our iniquities, me avodotenu. Okay, next one.
Before we go forward, could you give like a just like another example of that? Of that of like how a mem would be from, right? Not necessarily in this context, but just sorry to put you on the spot, but just something off
the cuff, I'd have to read through until I found a mem.
Gotcha.
Okay. If you want to give me a second.
Sure. Doesn't have to be anything profound either. Just another example of it's Genesis 2:2 right there.
Okay. Vayachal Elohim bayom hashvi'i malachto asher asa vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol malachto asher asa. Famous line. A lot of Jews know this. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. So you see the mem, okay, you've got it, with the blue over it, okay, and it's the same letter we have in what we've been looking at.
Mm-hmm.
From all malachto, his work, asher asa, which he had done.
Yep.
Quick example.
Yep.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot. But
No.
It just gives a little bit
more. Took me a while to find the word from.
It's fine.
So,
but it's just
all right. Okay.
Okay. So now verse 6.
All right. Wait a minute. Okay. So now I want you to take a look at verse 9.
Verse 9. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to come back to verse 9 later in our show.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
And they made his grave with the wicked, and which a rich and start over. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. The problem is that there's a little bit of yud. Can you show the yud, the fourth letter in the Hebrew word?
Yep.
The letter there is a yud. It means it's plural.
Mm-hmm.
This is a bad translation. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his deaths. Well, wait a minute. Doesn't that mean that if Jesus were going to fulfill this scripture, then he'd have to come back and die again? But it's clearly plural. And even a third grader who knows who's learning the Hebrew will know that that yud means plural.
Right.
Deaths. Christians now are saying, oh, well, it's the emphatic plural. The what? Well, it's made plural to emphasize the word. Where'd that come from? Show me that. And they'll give you examples. They'll give you examples of how it's when they find a plural, but you can translate it just as easily as a real plural, and it still makes sense.
Right.
Okay.
Especially because as we get later on in the chapter,
right,
the word for you ends up being plural, I do believe, right? So
where? I'm not sure where you mean.
We'll get there. No sense.
All right. Well, we'll get to it. That's the point. So here we have 3 words in 2 verses whose mistranslation changes the meaning of the text.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get to verse 9 because there's more involvement with this verse than right now. Okay. But it's in his deaths. Clearly, it's referring to a group of people who die.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be more apt to apply to the Jewish people as a whole, who continually, periodically die deaths and at the hands of Christians?
Yeah.
Pogroms, Holocausts, Chmielnitsky massacres,
mm-hmm.
Crusades. What am I missing? Okay. All right. So the point, though, is that there are, in fact, a lot of mistranslations going on here.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. We just finished reading through the whole thing, mistranslation and all. And when you hear them, you are probably going to be reminded of the image of Jesus. Okay. How he lived, how he died, especially. Okay. So why isn't this Isaiah 53 passage a prophecy concerning the Messiah that Jesus fulfilled according to the Jewish understanding of this passage? Why don't Jews see Jesus in this passage? Okay. As we're going to see, according to Jewish tradition, according to Isaiah, Isaiah was writing about the people of Israel personified as the suffering servant of God. And there are no less than 8 quotations that show this to be true leading up to Isaiah 53. Notice that in every one of the quotations, all from the book of Isaiah, it's the people of Israel who are called the servant of the Lord.
Right.
Okay. Remember that the word Israel is another name for Jacob. And so when the text reads Jacob or the text reads Israel, it still means the same people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you've got Isaiah 41:8, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. You've got Isaiah 43:10. Am I reading them in the same order as you have it? Okay, we're going to go over them.
Okay.
Okay.
You had.
All right, here we go. So, but you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. Okay, Isaiah 44:21. Remember these things, O Jacob and Israel, for you are my servant. I formed you, you are my servant, O Israel, you will not be forgotten by me. Isaiah 45:4. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel my chosen, I call you by your name, I surname you, though you do not know me. Isaiah 49:3. And he said to me, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will be glorified. By the way, the glorification of God through the servant, God's servant of Israel, is exactly what we have in Isaiah 53.
Right.
All right, scroll down. Okay, other passages like Isaiah 43:10, Isaiah 44:1, Isaiah 48:20, and Isaiah 49:7. But let's take a look at Isaiah 43:10. Why? Because Christians will say, oh, but the text of Isaiah 53, our text in question, is all about a single person.
Right.
Well, first of all, we just said it's bimotav, in his deaths.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's not that clear, but they'll say that since it's in the singular, it can only be about a single person.
Right.
However, look at Isaiah 43:10. You are my witnesses, that's plural, saith the Eternal, and my servant, whom I have chosen. In the same verse, it's referring to the Jews in the plural as witnesses, but it's also referring to the Jews as in the singular word servant, which is the same word used in Isaiah 53.
Right.
Okay.
And what are they witnessing? And what are they witnessing? What's the whole point of the verse? What are they witnessing? What are they attesting to? That there was no God formed.
Right. And by the way, you raise up a very good point. Okay. You are my witnesses to the Eternal, my servant whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe me and understand that I am he. Before me there was no God formed, neither shall there be after me. Yep. Jesus was formed in the womb of Mary long after Isaiah said these words.
Mm-hmm.
So he's not God. No God will be formed after me. Okay. By the way, you also have two other very interesting places where the Jews or Israel, same people, are called the servant of God. One is Jeremiah, not even in Isaiah, but Jeremiah. Therefore fear thou not, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord, neither be dismayed, O Israel, for lo, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity, and Jacob shall return and shall be in rest and be quiet, and none shall make him afraid. So even in Jeremiah, outside of Isaiah, you have a reference where the Jews are called God's servant. But you also have one in the Christian New Testament where Mary is speaking. And what does Mary say? Luke chapter 1, verse 54. He, meaning God, hath helped his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy. So Mary, in the Gospel of Luke, calls Israel the servant of God. Okay. Now, I think this whole thing is funny, but that's just me.
Yeah, sorry, that's funny.
All right. Now, okay. Plenty of quotations that we supplied showing that Isaiah 53 is referring to the people of Israel as a single person, the suffering servant, singular, of God, okay, in quotations that led up to Isaiah 53. Now, you'll see this a lot. Christian missionaries will claim Rashi, okay, who was a rabbi in the late 11th century, okay, they'll say Rashi made up the whole thing that the suffering servant is the people of Israel personified as a single individual, but up until Rashi, all the Jews believed it was really about the Messiah. I hear that so often.
I did a video on it.
Yeah, exactly. So you know this. Probably everybody watching this knows this too, but it's simply not true. And you can prove it's not true from the writings of Christians themselves long before Rashi was born.
Right.
There's a book written in the year 248, okay, 800 years before Rashi, by the way. It's called Contra Kelsum. It's written by an early church father called Origen. And he records that Jews living in his time interpreted this passage of Isaiah 53 as referring to the entire nation of Israel personified as one. Okay, now I want you to, okay, bring this up. Okay.
How far?
All right. I remember that once in a discussion with some whom the Jews regard as learned, I used these prophecies, that's the Isaiah 53 passage. At this, the Jews said that these prophecies referred to the whole people as though of a single individual, since they were scattered in the dispersion and smitten, that as a result of the scattering of the Jews among the other nations, many might become proselytes, converts to Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
You can find this in the book translated by Henry Chadwick, published by the Cambridge University Press on Origin. Okay. You can also find it on the internet in 2 different places. Okay. And for this, I want you to give up the share screen.
Okay.
Okay. No,
What's really funny too, while you bring this up, is that Celsus, who he was refuting, was a pagan. He had no dog in that fight. So why would he care how the? Do you get what I mean? It's not like Origen was arguing with a Jewish person.
Right.
He was arguing with a pagan. So if a pagan using a Jewish apologetic or their understanding, it's not. How would that pagan make that up? Do you know what I mean? So it has to be legitimate.
Okay. Now, okay, share screen, and I think it's this one and this one. Okay, I hope this works. Okay, yep. I have the early Christian writings on the screen that you just had up. So we'll do that one first. Click. It goes to Origin, Contra Kelsum, Contra Kelsus in this case, book 1. We don't want book 1. We want book LVI. So you go way down to LV. Wait a minute.
It's LV.
Oh, I'm sorry, LV. So here it says chapter LV. Now I remember that on one occasion, a disputation held with certain Jews who were reckoned as wise men, I quoted these prophecies, to which my Jewish opponent replied that these predictions bore reference to the whole people, regarded as one individual, and as being in a state of dispersion and suffering, in order that many proselytes might be gained on account of the dispersion of the Jews among numerous heathen nations. Okay?
Too easy.
All right. And then, oops.
Oop.
That was a mistake.
Wrong button.
Wait a minute. Okay. Oh, yeah. And then there's another place, ccel.org. Okay. Let me do this again. Okay. Here's another place. And it goes right to the right chapter.
Nice.
Okay. Cool. And you got the same paragraph. Now I remember that on one occasion, a disputation held with certain Jews who were reckoned wise men, I quoted these prophecies, to which my Jewish opponent replied that these predictions were reference to the whole people, regarded as one individual, and it goes on from there. It's the same thing.
Right.
Okay.
And if they were reckoned wise men, then they weren't just some schmuck off the street.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Okay. The point being that from Christian writings themselves, it shows that Rashi didn't make this thing up.
Right.
Woo. Okay. Okay. Telling you. All right. Okay. All right. Now, more than anything, I hope people listen to this. Before we look at the text of Isaiah 53, there are questions that you have to ask. The Bible is explicitly clear. We read in Deuteronomy 24:16. Deuteronomy 24:16, every man shall be put to death for his own sin. The concept that nobody else can die for your sin, every man is to be put to death for his own sin, the concept is also found in Exodus 32, verse 30 to 35. Exodus 32, 30 to 35. And the Eternal said to Moses, whosoever hath sinned against me, him will I blot out of my book. And again, Ezekiel 18, verses 1 through 4, verses 20 to 24, and verses 26 to 27. Behold, all souls are mine. As the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son is mine. The soul that sins, it shall die. And then verse 20, the soul that sins, it shall die. The Son shall not bear the sin of the Father, neither shall the Father bear the sin of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. It doesn't say the wickedness of the wicked is on the righteous. It says the wickedness of the wicked is on the wicked.
Right.
Okay. Now, the Bible repeatedly, the Bible consistently, the Bible without any need of interpretation, without any spin, literally and clearly states that the person who commits the sin is the person who gets the punishment for the sin. Mm-hmm. So the question you have to ask before you read Isaiah 53 is, when did God change his mind? If it's true, quote, every man shall be put to death for his own sin, Deuteronomy 24:16, then the only way you can interpret Isaiah 53 to mean the opposite, that Jesus died for your sins, is if God changed his mind.
Right.
Where did that happen? When did he bring everybody back to Mount Sinai and say, I was fooling, I changed my mind? Otherwise, you have to assume he didn't mean what he said when he said, Ish bechet o yumatu, every man shall be put to death for his own sin.
Right.
The interpretation Christians give to Isaiah 53 is exactly that. It's an interpretation, a misinterpretation, and one that goes against the ideas that are expressed elsewhere in the Bible, as we've seen.
Right.
Okay. The Christian interpretation of a dying, saving Messiah is also one that was completely unknown to Jesus' disciples, as we've talked about, and which, by the way, I talk about in my book. When Jesus explained his mission to his disciples, that he was to die for the sins of humanity according to this definition of Messiah, his disciples, they didn't understand what he was saying.
Right.
And their response was to rebuke Jesus for having said it. So Matthew 16, verse 13 to 23. Okay, do you have that?
I don't see it.
Okay, my mistake. Sorry.
Fine. I mean, we discussed it earlier. You can just go ahead and read it.
Okay. I can do better than that. Get off of this real quick.
Yep.
Okay. And then, wait a minute. Hello. Thank you. Share screen. Okay. This is. Stop it. Okay. This is Matthew 16, 13 to 23. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, but whom do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said to him, blessed art you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it unto you, but my Father which is in heaven. And then verse 20, then charged he his disciples that they should tell nobody that he was Jesus the Messiah, Jesus the Christ. From that time forth began Jesus to show to his disciples how that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he, Jesus, turned and said to Peter, get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offense to me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So a few verses after Jesus calls Peter, the rock upon which he's going to make this
his church,
he later immediately calls him, get behind me, Satan.
Right.
Okay. But the point is that they didn't know what he was talking about.
Right.
The concept of dying, saving man God, clearly you can hear that in Greco-Roman mythology and pagan idolatry. Mm-hmm. Okay. Even Hercules had a human mother and Zeus for a father. His mother was human, his father was God, is just as good a description of Hercules, Perseus, Dionysus, as it is Jesus.
Yep.
Okay. By the way, you can see the same basic story in Mark 8, 31 to 33, and Luke 18, 31 to 34. Okay. If they knew about this dying, saving man God, they would have said, "Oh, thank you, Jesus," and they wouldn't have rebuked him for doing this.
Right.
Okay. All right. Once again, put it up. Okay.
Yep.
And I hope I have this. Didn't mess up the order.
No, you're fine.
Again.
No problem.
Okay. 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 Give me one more second. I got to go back to you. Okay. You have to understand something about the New Testament. The New Testament was written with the expressed purpose in mind of making it look like Jesus fulfilled prophecy.
Right.
But Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John never met Jesus.
Right.
Whoever wrote Matthew, whoever wrote Mark, whoever wrote Luke, whoever wrote John, okay, wrote anywhere from 30 to 60 to 70 years after Jesus was dead and buried.
Mm-hmm.
They had a whole bunch of stories about him that they tried to weave into a narrative. Their gospels disagree one with the other.
Yep.
Okay. But it's clear that they were making up stories about Jesus to make it seem that he fulfilled scripture, that he fulfilled prophecy. And here are two examples. See, we still haven't even touched Isaiah 53, by the way.
Right.
Okay. Keep in mind how many animals we're talking about in each version.
Mm-hmm.
The Matthew version, the Mark version. Matthew 21, verse 1 through 7. And when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethpage to the Mountain of Olives, then Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately you will find an ass tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on an ass, and on a colt, the foal of an ass." The disciples went and did as Jesus directed them. They brought the ass and the colt and put their garments on them, and he sat thereon. Notice that according to Matthew, Jesus is fulfilling a prophecy because spoken by the prophet, mm-hmm. Tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on an ass, and on a colt, the foal of an ass. Okay. Mark, however, tells the same story with a difference.
Yep.
Mark 11, 1 through 7. It sounds the same. Listen carefully. And when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethpage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it, and will send it back here immediately.' And they went away and found a colt tied at the door out in the open street, and they untied it. And those who stood there said to them, 'What are you doing untying the colt?' And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments on it, and he sat upon it." Now, clearly, according to Mark, there was only one animal.
Right.
But according to Matthew, the prophecy is that there are going to be two animals. Mm-hmm. That means according to according to Mark's version, Jesus didn't fulfill the prophecy that Matthew said was a prophecy.
Right.
Okay. So what's the answer? Is it talking about one animal or two animals? Here's the passage it's based on. Zechariah chapter 9, verses 9, and look at 10. And it should sound familiar. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you, triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on an ass, on a colt, the foal of an ass." Is that talking about one animal, or is it talking about two animals?
One.
How do you know?
Because it's poetry.
Exactly. It's Hebrew biblical poetry, which is a rhyming of sound. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, which is not a rhyming of sound. It's a rhyming of ideas. Mm-hmm. So when it says humble and riding on an ass, and then repeats on a colt, the foal of an ass, it's saying the same animal. It's really talking about one. However, Matthew didn't understand this, So he invented his story about Jesus coming into Jerusalem the first time regarding two animals. Mark did understand this properly to be discussing only one animal. So he invented his story about Jesus coming into Jerusalem the first time while writing on only one animal. In other words, they don't know how Jesus went into Jerusalem. They're making it up, but they're writing it in such a way to make it look like Jesus fulfilled the prophecy as Matthew understood it, and Jesus fulfilled the prophecy as Mark understood the prophecy.
Right.
They're not writing history. They're writing theology. That's very important. Okay. All right.
And just an aside, cutting off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, the rhyming of that idea is that in the end time, there will be a reunification of all 12 tribes.
And there's not going to be a war either.
Right.
All wars will cease, which never happened after Jesus.
Exactly.
Okay. But okay. Just real quick, my fault. Can we go back to that again?
Which
we got it up. Don't move it.
Okay.
Okay. This is verse 10. I will cut off the chariots from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. Excuse me, when did Jesus command peace to the nations? I came not to bring peace, but I came to bring a sword. I came to turn every man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and your enemies will be those of your own household.
Yep.
That's commanding peace to the nations. and it says of this same person, his dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. When did Jesus ever have dominion? He never was a sovereign ruler, except maybe in the minds of Christians who believe he was the Messiah or whatever. But that's not real. That's just their faith, their opinion.
And when they did try to crown him, he ran away. Ain't that funny?
Yeah. Wonder how that worked. All right. So, okay. Now we're going to take a closer look at what Isaiah 53 says, because what I've said this before, Steve, the best proof that Jesus wasn't the Messiah is to be found in the pages of the Christian's New Testament.
Yep.
The best proof that Jesus was not the Messiah is found in the pages of the Christian's New Testament. So let's look at Isaiah 53, which, remember, okay, I forgot to talk about something. It's too important to pass.
Let's talk about it. Go ahead.
Okay. Steve, I'm sorry. Go back to the full text of Isaiah 53, even though it's the bad translation. Okay. Sorry.
Oh, right here.
Okay. I want you to go to 52, go to the top of this section. Okay. How do we know, even though we just read 5 out of like 9 different verses where it's really talking about the Jewish people personified as a single individual? How do we know that? Because the text itself explicitly says it.
Yep.
Who was Isaiah preaching to? Who was Isaiah concerned about? Who was Isaiah wanting to affect their behavior?
Jews.
The Jews. Okay, now take a look at verse 14 of Isaiah 52, part of this suffering servant section. Okay. As many were astonished at you. From the very beginning of this, we know he's talking about the Jewish people, because he says that many were astonished at you. This is talking about the Jewish people. But then the very next phrase, his appearance was so marred, and that's where you get the change from the plural, the large group, to the singular, to the personification of the Jewish people into one individual.
Sure, but even in that stanza, Rabbi, beyond the sons of men, that's plural.
Right. And his form beyond the sons of his, beyond that of humans. Okay, we're going to get to that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
His appearance was so marred. Really, have you ever seen a picture of Jesus painted where he was ugly and not muscular and handsome?
Right.
We'll get to that.
Read
Right.
any political cartoon from 1940s Germany, and you'll see a marred appearance.
Okay, let's go back to these verses. All right, I just wanted to make sure to say that.
So you want me to go back down again?
Yeah, go back to Isaiah 52:14. See, now we're taking a look at the actual verses, okay? 2 verses in Isaiah describe this servant of God, this servant who suffers because he's a servant of God, as having been either too ugly to be human in appearance or too plain looking to make us notice him. Isaiah 52:14, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance and his form beyond that of the sons of men. And Isaiah 53, verse 2, he had no form or comeliness that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. Every single picture I've ever seen painted of Jesus shows a man who was handsome, who was tall and muscular, and you'd assume that a carpenter would be muscular, dealing with the trees and chopping them down and making them into carpentry stuff, like you. Okay, Isaiah isn't referring to the servant at only one time and place, like after a scourging or a crucifixion. It's referring to this people personified as one, okay, as for their whole life. It's how they look in general to the entire non-Jewish world.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, you've seen pictures, in the Nazi era, Jews portrayed as monkeys and all this other stuff.
Yep.
Okay. And by the way, there's evidence in the Christian New Testament that indicates Jesus was a handsome man whose company was actually desired by everybody else, and whose stature, which means appearance, does not match the description we just had in Isaiah.
Mm-hmm.
Luke chapter 2, verse 52. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Okay. Isaiah 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected by men. Wait a minute. We just had a verse in Luke 2:52 that said he increased in favor with God and man. So is this talking about somebody who once in their life gets despised and rejected by men? I got news for you. Every kid who gets beaten up in grade school, okay, or teased or bullied is despised and rejected by men. That could apply to anybody. It's applying to the Jews who throughout our 4,000-year history have been despised and rejected by all men.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So in many places in the Christian's New Testament, like we just read it at Luke 2:52, Jesus is described as not being rejected and despised by men, but rather having a huge following. Mm-hmm. And it starts with the beginning of his ministry and goes all the way up to the crucifixion.
Yep.
So Matthew 21:46. But when they tried to arrest him, they feared the multitudes because they held him to be a prophet. Luke 23:26 and 27. And as they led him astray, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. And there followed him a great multitude of the people and of women who bewailed and lamented him. Okay. Mark chapter 14, verses 1 and 2. After 2 days was the feast of the Passover and of unleavened bread, and the chief priests and scribes sought how they might take him by craft and put him to death. But they said, not on the feast day, lest there be an uproar of the people. That's not just a couple of people. That's not despised and rejected by men. That's a multitude of people.
Right. The people. That's insinuating the whole population. Yeah.
Matthew chapter 4, verse 24 to 25. And his fame went throughout all Syria. Really? And they brought unto him all sick people that were taken with diverse diseases and torments, and those which were possessed with devils, and those which were lunatic, and those that had the palsy, and he healed them. And there followed him a great multitudes of people from Galilee, from Decapolis, and from Jerusalem, and from Judea, and from beyond Jordan. Despised and rejected by men, not according to the New Testament. So the New Testament is showing that Isaiah 53 cannot be about Jesus.
Right.
Matthew 21, verse 9. And the multitudes that went before and that followed cried, saying, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna is not a praise. It's, oh my God, we're bad off. Save us.
Yes,
Hosanna, save us. Whatever. Matthew 21, 11. And the multitude said, this is Jesus, the prophet of Nazareth of Galilee. Luke 4, 14 to 15. And Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit unto Galilee, and there went out a fame of him through all the region round about, and he taught in their synagogues, being glorified of all. Luke 7, 11 to 12. And it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, whatever, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. And when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her.
Mm-hmm.
Luke 7, 16 to 17. And there came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen among us, and that God has visited his people. And this rumor of him went forth throughout all Judea and throughout all the region round about. Despised and rejected by men? Hardly. Luke 8, 4. And when much people were gathered together and were come to him out of every city, he spoke by a parable. Luke 8, 19. Then came to him his mother and his brethren, could not come at him for the press, meaning the people pressed. They couldn't get through. Luke 8, 45. And Jesus said, who touched me? When all denied. Peter and they that were with him said, Master, the multitude throng thee and press thee, and savest thou who touched me. Sayest thou who touched me. John 12, 11. Because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. John 12, 42. Nevertheless, among the chief rulers also many believed on him, but because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. So even in secret, there were multitudes. Even in secret, according to the New Testament. Not sure how much I believe that, but whatever. The point is that despised and rejected by men, not even close. All right. Two quotations from the Isaiah passage describe somebody who remains silent when accused by his captors, one who was innocent of any wrongdoing. This is in Acts 8 that we just read.
Yep.
Okay. I hope he sees this. I hope he's listening. It comes from Isaiah 53, 7. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. Mm-hmm. And Isaiah 53, 9, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Really? There's a quotation in the Christian's New Testament that states Jesus rebuked his captors.
Yep.
Which is called what? Opening his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
John chapter 18, verse 22 to 23. John 18, 22 to 23. And when he, that's Jesus, had spoken thus, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand, saying, Answerest thou the high priest so? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why smitest thou me? Jesus is rebuking the man who slapped him, palm of the hand, slapped him, okay? And he says, if I did something wrong, tell me what I did wrong. But if I didn't do something wrong, if I did well, why'd you hit me?
Where's the turning of the other cheek there too?
Ah, exactly. Okay. Because everybody knows Matthew 5:29, Jesus says, turn the other cheek. And by the way, if Jesus tells people to do one thing and doesn't do it himself, don't we call that hypocrisy? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Which David addresses in the Psalms.
And if Isaiah 53:9 says there was no deceit in his mouth, isn't it kind of deceptive to say, do this, but I myself won't?
Right.
Isn't it trying to deceive people to doing what the deceiver himself will not do? Isn't that hypocrisy? Which is what Jesus did when he said, turn the other cheek, but he himself didn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they say David was talking to referring to Jesus in the Psalms, but in another psalm it says, I hate the double-minded, but love your Torah. That's double-mindedness right there. Is teaching one thing and then practicing another.
Which is called hypocrisy, which is a form of deception, which violates Isaiah 53 in verse 9. There was no deceit in his mouth.
Which is what he was calling the Pharisees. Maybe he should have looked in the mirror.
Right. Okay.
By the way, do you want to address these two verses before that, or do you want to come back to these?
No, I wanted
Jeremiah 30:17.
in what I sent you, okay, I had a reason to do it. Okay. Oh, yes, Isaiah 53:4. I jumped over that. Sorry. Isaiah 53, that's our passage for Isaiah 53. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. It's not just Isaiah that says this of the Jewish people. It's also Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 17. For I will restore health unto thee, and I will heal thee of thy wounds, saith the Lord, because they called thee an outcast, saying, this is Zion, whom no man seeketh after.
Right.
It reflects the same basic sentiment as of Isaiah 53:4.
Right. And every Christian knows Jeremiah 30 is the Jacob's trouble chapter. They would never disagree that that is about Israel's sufferings.
Right. Okay. Now, I want to see something. Would you mind lowering the where the text is? I want to see what comes below this. Okay.
Violence.
All right. Yeah. Let me just do something real quick. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. We mentioned Isaiah 53:9 in the thing you got in purple, and there was no deceit in his mouth, right?
Right.
And then down below it says, right below, yeah, it says, although he had done no violence, which is still Isaiah 53:9, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If I did this correctly, which I may not have, I want you to go all the way back to the top. Okay.
All the way back to the top.
All the way back to the top. And wait a minute. Did I just mess that up? Yes, I did mess that up. Give me 1 second. We may still be getting to this in a minute. Okay. All right. Yeah, all the way up to the top. I want you to go to verse 9.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't understand how Christians don't even read their own text. Steve, I don't understand how they don't even read their own text.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Steve, answer my questions, okay? Be my shill. Okay?
Gotcha.
Verse 9. And they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death or deaths, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. They made his grave with the wicked. Who owned the grave that Jesus was placed in?
Joseph of Arimathea.
And what do we know about Joseph of Arimathea?
That he was a righteous man.
What else do we know about him?
What else do we know about him?
Yeah.
Enlighten me.
Okay. Then sorry, I apologize once again. Let me find the quotations. Okay. Let me find the quotations as quick as I can.
Oh, that he was rich.
Bingo.
Oh, he was a rich man. He was a wealthy man.
Okay. All right. Okay, here it is. So let me just use what I have real quick, okay? Mm-hmm. Get off of the share. Okay. Okay. Here, stop it. Here we have the quotations. Isaiah 53:9, and he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. But who is Jesus crucified with? 2 thieves.
Mm-hmm.
Thieves,
which is funny because that thief actually isn't the correct translation. That was to
no. I know that, but a thief, a thief is considered wicked.
Yeah. Yep.
So the text said made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. The problem is that he made his grave with the rich and was with the wicked in his death.
Yep.
In other words, when they invented the stories of Jesus, trying to make it look like it was Isaiah, they got mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
According to their New Testament, he didn't make his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. He made his grave with the rich and was with the wicked when he died.
Right.
That alone shows, quick story. Okay,
Yeah.
quick story. I know we're pressed for time, but quick story. I get invited to a church Bible study group answering questions. It's actually what I did this afternoon at a retirement home, at a Bible study retirement home. And one of the questions they asked me was, well, have you ever read Isaiah 53? Hello, Rabbi here. I said, yeah, what about it? He says, well, don't you think it sounds like Jesus? And I said, how could it sound like Jesus? Can you read to me your translation of Isaiah 53:9? So he opens up his Bible and he reads Isaiah 53:9. Okay. He made his grave with the wicked, with the rich in his death. I said, his grave was with the wicked? I thought a rich man, Joseph of Arimathea, owned the grave. And they said, oh, yeah. I said that his grave was with the rich. And who did he die with? Crucified between two thieves, two wicked people. So he was with the wicked in his death. So Jesus did the opposite of what your Isaiah 53:9 says. They went dead silent for a couple of minutes.
Right.
They had no idea that this is what their own Bible said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Should have said that earlier, but whatever. Okay.
But what I was saying, a better translation is actually insurrectionists.
Because, and by the way, according to Tacitus, Josephus, and Philo, crucifixion was reserved only for insurrectionists.
Insurrectionists, exactly.
Okay, and by the way, we're going to get to that as part of Isaiah 53.
Yep.
Okay.
You still need me up here? Or you want to go back down?
No, go back down to although he had done no violence.
There you go.
Okay. All right. They make Jesus sound like he's a man of peace. And they say that Isaiah 53:9, although he had done no violence, is talking about Jesus because Jesus was a man of peace. No, he wasn't. He was a very violent man. And almost everybody I know, Jew or non-Jew, Christian or non-Christian, knows about Jesus cleansing the temple.
Right.
Okay. Matthew 21, verse 12. Jesus entered the temple of God and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. Okay. And by the way, according to John chapter 2, verse 15, Jesus himself made a scourge to whip everybody with.
Mm-hmm.
And it says, and when he had made a scourge of small cords, he drove them all out of the temple, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overthrew the tables. I've actually heard Christians say, well, he made the scourge, but he wasn't violent. He didn't hit anybody with it. I'm telling you, that's what they've said. Okay.
Which means that's some premeditated violence if you're going.
Oh, yes.
Making yourself.
Oh, yes.
A whip, right?
It doesn't say, although he had done violence that was only necessary. It does not say, although he had only done violence that was against bad people. It says, although he had done no violence.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, if they are putting him to death because he had done violence, doing violence in the temple draws attention to himself by Rome. Mm-hmm. That's why they saw him as an insurrectionist, because he was stirring up the crowds, and that's why they killed him.
Yep.
Exactly the opposite, by the way, of Isaiah 53:9. Mm-hmm. Okay. Notice something, and this is important.
Do you by chance have Zephaniah 3:13 in here anywhere?
No, I do not. I know I need to add it, but I don't have it. We'll get to it at the end.
Okay.
Okay. So the person that Isaiah 53 is talking about has done no violence. Okay. In the New Testament, what does it say about the thing that was placed over Jesus's head? what does it say about what was over his head? First of all, it's called the accusation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's called the accusation. Verse 37 of Matthew 27. And set up over his head his accusation written, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." According to Mark, the superscription of his accusation was written over the King of the Jews. Doesn't use the name Jesus, does it?
Mm-mm.
Luke chapter 23, verse 38. And a superscription also was written over him in letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. Now, all three are different from each other. And then John chapter 19, verse 19, and Pilate himself wrote a title and put it on the cross. And the writing was, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." 4 different versions of what was written over Jesus's head, and not one agrees with the other 3. But my point in all of this is they call it the accusation. This is why he was crucified. This is what he's accused of doing to get himself crucified. What's the problem? What's the accusation? The accusation is quite simple. Okay? If you think this is your king, Jesus, the King of the Jews, if you think this is the king instead of the emperor in Rome, this is what's going to happen to him, and this is what's going to happen to you. That's what it means to have the accusation in the first place. It's the crime he was accused of, and that is being the King of the Jews instead of the Roman emperor.
Have you studied out the Spartacus rebellion?
It's been a while.
So on the Appian Way,
Yeah.
All the rebels that were captured were crucified along the Appian Way.
Right.
For miles.
10,000.
Yeah, exactly.
If I remember.
Of rebels.
Right.
So it just goes to show you, Rome don't mess around with you making a claim against the empire, right? You do something we don't like that goes against the empire's rule, and we pin you up for everyone to see.
Because we see it as insurrection.
Exactly.
And it's important to understand that the violence he perpetrated in the temple brought attention to himself, and it was for that violence he was seen as an insurrectionist and why he was crucified.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But you also have to understand, why were the money changers at the temple? Why were the people selling sacrifices at the temple?
Right.
Because it was mandated by God in Deuteronomy 14. God demanded that they be there.
Yep.
It says you're so moved by God's generosity to you, you want to sacrifice a big cow, but you live too far away to get the cow to the temple. So sell it where you live, take the money to Jerusalem, exchange it for the local money.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have a money changer, and then buy what you want, and that's what you sacrifice. So you don't have to carry the big cow.
Right.
Deuteronomy.
It's not like nowadays when your church is a block down the road. You know what I mean?
It's not like it's not like today where you can email the money.
Yeah. No kidding.
Or use your your cell phone. Okay. This is Deuteronomy 14, verse 24 to 26. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the eternal thy God shall choose to set his name there, which means the temple, when the eternal thy God has blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, bind up the money in thy hand, and shall go to the place which the eternal thy God shall choose, the temple. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatever thy soul lusts after, for oxen, for sheep, wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever your soul desires. And thou shalt eat there before the eternal thy God, and you shall rejoice, thou and thy household. If I am in Syria using Syria money,
mm-hmm.
and I take my cow and sell it, I'm going to be given Syrian money. I then go to the temple in Jerusalem and I turn it into local money. Remember how often in the Torah it talks about according to the shekel of the temple?
Yep.
They had extremely strict weights.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they had people going along in the sales area to make sure everybody was honest. Okay, at any rate, the point is that the reason why the money changers are there is because God ordained them to be there. The reason why the people are selling sacrifices there is because God ordained them to be there. Right. Deuteronomy 14. So when Jesus goes to turn it over, he's violating what God himself demanded to be there. Now, Christians will say, oh, well, they were committing usury. They were charging too much. Prove it. Show me a verse. Where does it say that? That's just they're excusing him from being a violent person. It doesn't say he only did righteous violence. Speaking in Isaiah 53, it says he had done no violence. That's not the only violence that he had done. Okay. Let's see. So Mark chapter 11, 12 to 14, and then 20 to 21. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if happily he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and said to it, no man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. What a nice guy. And his disciples heard it, and in the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from its roots. And Peter, calling to remembrance, said unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursed is withered away. Well, first of all, he's condemning the tree for something that's not the tree's fault, because it wasn't even the season for figs. Second of all, who owned the fig tree? It wasn't Jesus's to destroy.
Right.
And what does the Bible say in war? You don't harm the fruit trees in Deuteronomy?
Right.
And by the way, in my religion, when we recite a blessing thanking God for various foods, one of the blessings we thank God for is we thank God as the creator of the fruit of the tree.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus can destroy the tree. Why didn't he just say, okay, I want fruit. Boom, there's the fruit.
Exactly.
He was a violent man who got angry at a tree and destroyed it, even though it wasn't the season for figs on that tree.
Or killing a whole herd of swine. You probably bankrupted the poor guy that owned them.
I'm getting to that. I think I didn't include it. I didn't include it. All right. I should have. Okay.
But yeah, it doesn't say anywhere in the New Testament that he made reparations.
No.
Like, who cares if they were pigs, even if they are, aren't kosher? But still, you probably bankrupted the poor guy who owned them.
Exactly.
But
who owned the tree? Most fruit trees don't grow for nobody.
Right.
Okay, people tend to it. So somebody owned it. Matthew chapter 10, verse 34 to 36. We've had this in numerous occasions on many videos. Think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother, and the daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be they of his own household. Again, what a nice guy. Okay. He didn't command peace to the world. Okay. He didn't come to bring peace. He's not a peaceful man. He came to do the exact opposite. Finally, Jesus tells a parable of how a king has to go away to get crowned and then comes back. Some people say that's a parable about the second coming. I'm not convinced of that. Whatever. The point is, Jesus tells this parable about himself. And what does he say? Luke chapter 19, verse 27, when he comes back. But those mine enemies, which would not that I should reign over them, bring them hither and slay them before me. This is a man of peace. This is a man who had done no violence. Again, the best proof that Jesus wasn't the Messiah and didn't fulfill certainly Isaiah 53 is found in the pages of the Christian New Testament itself.
Right.
Finally, for what we're doing today, it says, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. Isaiah 53:10. Christians will say offspring, that means disciples. No, No. Okay. It's he shall see his seed. Okay. Spermatozoa. Okay.
Zerah in Hebrew.
Zerah is seed. He
Mm-hmm.
shall see his seed, which is translated properly as offspring, his descendants. Okay. How do we know that? How do we know that Zerah means biological children, descendants, progeny? And we know that from Genesis chapter 15, verses 2 through 4. Genesis 15, 2 through 4. Follow this. Abram, this is before his name was changed to Abraham. Abraham is complaining to God that God promised him a descendant, but he doesn't have one.
Right.
And Abram said, Eternal God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless? And the son, the ben of my house, is this Eliezer of Damascus. Then Abram said, See, to me you have given no seed, no zerah, the same word we find in Isaiah 53:10, which means biological child. I have this son, okay, this ben of my house, this son of my house, but that doesn't mean biological son. Ben means son, but it implies like a adopted person or something.
Well,
But
I
we're
think
talking
of like a
air,
yeshiva student or a yeshiva student is called like a Ben Torah,
right,
right?
which means a member of the Torah.
Yeah,
Okay,
right.
it's actually saying he's a member of my house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but he wants a biological son. That's why he uses the word zerah, seed. And Abram said, See, to me you have given no seed, and see, the son, the ben of my house, the member of my household, is my heir. Suddenly the word of God came to him, saying, That one will not inherit you. None but him that shall come forth from within your bowels shall be your heir.
Right. Which is also the same language used when David is being told about Solomon.
Right? Okay. By the way, doesn't it also say he shall prolong his days?
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah 53:10. Did we just read that?
Yep.
Jesus died in his 30s. That's a young age.
Mm-hmm.
Christians may respond, they may say, oh, Isaiah meant Jesus' disciples, but we've already gone through that. Okay. Clearly.
But here's the deal, even if it does mean Jesus' disciples, wouldn't they all say that they were all martyred within the next 10 years anyway? So they were probably only in their 40s too.
Right.
Right?
For the sake of argument, just for the sake of argument, let's assume that Isaiah was making a prophecy of Isaiah's future, rather than interpreting his own past as the past tenses of his speech indicate.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah 53 could be applied not only to the people of Israel in the days of Isaiah, but throughout all of history.
Sure.
Reread the Isaiah passage and think of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, the Jewish victims of the pogroms, the Jewish victims of the Inquisition, the Jewish victims of the Crusades, or any other Christian persecution of Jews as you read Isaiah 53. What violence did the Jews do to deserve the fate given to them by Christians? Right. None. Jesus didn't fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah 53, nor did he fulfill any of the real and important prophecies concerning the real Messiah. And right. That is the end of part 1.
Well said. Well put.
Okay.
Great job.
Now, well, I hope so.
Very well.
All right. Okay.
We'll be back with part 2, guys. But yeah, any closing statements, Rabbi?
Just pick up the Bible, try to get a halfway decent translation, and read it. Don't assume it says what your ministers and priests and teachers have told you it says.
Right.
Read it for yourself. Right. You're going to come up with questions, or you should certainly, and we've raised them today.
For sure. But yeah, everybody, Rabbi Stuart Federer, author of Judaism and Christianity: A Contrast, English and Spanish, in the description. Please, 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 helps me out, helps him out, and you're going to learn something too. And I do believe you address some proof texts at the end of the book, so you might even get some Isaiah 53.
Oh yeah, Isaiah 53 is there. Basically, what we already covered.
Cool.
I think it did it enough to say, you know, the best description of the new of Jesus in the New Testament proves he couldn't have been the Messiah, proves he didn't fulfill Isaiah 53. So I didn't even do a part 2. I just left it at that.
Right. But we're going to do a part 2. So get the book, and watch the videos. It'll bounce off each other perfectly, and will really help you out. But until next time, everyone.
It's been a long day today.
Yeah, for sure. I hear that.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Okay, all right.
But I'm Steve Eisenhower. This was the Exodus Project. We'll catch you next time, everyone.